Okay, so this is just a test. Let me look at apps. No, give me about 10 minutes to
All right.
live transcript. All right, so request that the host enable live transcript for meeting. So I'm putting a request. So that request should come up with you. Do you see it?
Yep. I enabled it.
Okay, good. So view full transcript. Good. All right, so I'm viewing it, but I'm not sure if it will save transcript. Yeah. So when I do that, I can save the transcript and then it's saved and then it'll show in a folder. Great. All right. And that'll be on this PC. Great. Wonderful. All right. Now, you were the one that recorded, correct? I want to record now. All right, so I'm assuming I'm recording as well. Let me stop recording. All right, let me record again. All right, so it seems like the top left has different things when it does that. Okay, so can you stop recording now?
What? Can I what?
Can you stop recording?
You want me to stop recording?
Yeah, because that was just a trial.
I'm recording anyway.
You should start recording when we start the interview. So right now, you're waiting for Azania, and there she is, but stop a recording.
All right, just a moment.
You're going to be admitting it's Azania, right? Not me.
Right, right. Okay, no. Okay, Azenia, I'm gonna make you a co-host.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, give me a moment. I need to just get the my profile. Let me record right now. Good morning, everyone. This is February the 15th, 2022. We are continuing our interview of Luke Tripp by Azania Tripp. I will also be doing a transcript of that. So I will be able to even record a transcript from the computer. So make sure you're speaking clearly so we don't have strange things being transcribed by the computer. Okay, over to you, Azania.
Okay. So today, Dad, Mom wanted us to talk about your experience in Cuba and your interactions and conversations with Che Guevara. And in Charles' writings, he had spoken about how Black students that had attended the trip were able to speak with him first before coming together as a larger group. Could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Okay. Well, we were very excited about meeting Che Guevara because he symbolized the revolutionary, during the 1960s, and he was his image was his image could be found on many T-shirts and posters because of, as I said before, he became that symbol of the revolutionary. Um, we had, I can't recall too much of the conversation that our smaller group had with Che Guevara, but I do remember the meeting with the larger group. And of course, we had these continuing problems. As I mentioned before, many of these white students were, some of them were not progressive students at all in this class. Give you one example of questions we thought that were off the wall. For instance, the Cubans had a newspaper, Grama, and that was their political organ. And some white students were asked, well, in Cuba, is there freedom of the press? Can dissenting views be expressed in the newspaper, right? And Che Guevara said that essentially he challenged the whole notion about free press. He said for the press in the United States, he said that press is the corporate press. It's the press of capitalism. It's the press of imperialism. And that's basically the voice of the ruling class. He said, we're building a revolution, and the paper serves the people, and it speaks with the voice of the people, the revolutionary voice, right? And so it's these things about, well, where there's white students, first of all, they have this mistaken notion that there is a free press, and no, the press belongs to those who own it. If you want your voice expressed, then you have to own your press. And in the U.S., we had our own experience of, for instance, I wrote for the Inner City Voice, and even we had some of the tradesmen who try to silence us by not printing the paper, and we had to take the paper, the drafts, all the way to Chicago, and they were printed by the Nation of Islam. Okay, so there are various ways that they can muzzle your voice, even at various levels. So the idea that if you're in America, you can say anything or print anything is really incorrect.
Do you have any other memories of things that he shared in the larger meeting? And do you have any recollection of the smaller meeting at all, or it just
That meeting, though, that's the most kind of the vivid kind of event that sticks in my mind. The other things I think have unfortunately fade away after 60 years.
were there any questions were there any questions that you in particularly wish you would have asked, or questions that maybe you would ask him now?
Not right off the top, as I said before, I did not go to these meetings with a lot of with many questions. My whole orientation was to listen, right? And others were asking, but I asked very few questions, and I was very attentive to listen to what the questions and answers and the responses were.
So, also in Charles' writing, he talks about meeting with Fidel Castro. Do you have any recollection of this meetings with him or any other key figures in the Cuban Revolution?
I remember Fidel speaking at large rallies, not so much with our group, but very large rallies. And he was a very passionate speaker and a very long-winded speaker. Right? So that's what I remember. He's very dynamic. He's very passionate. He could hold the attention of his large audience for a long time because he did speak a long time.
What made him a captivating speaker? And do you remember any theories or messages that he had shared that you had heard from him?
Well, when a speaker brings a lot of passion to their message, and what comes across is that message is authentic, he, and he embraces the ideas that he's expressing and his commitments, it comes through. And that's why I think he can hold the audience, is because he can establish that relationship and that vibe, and they stay with the vibe, okay, in the hot sun, standing out there listening to him. So, you have to be a very dynamic speaker, and you have to really kind of connect with your audience to hold them if they're just standing in, over an hour just to listen to what you have to say. And plus, he was very charismatic, right? So it's that and his ability and his speaking ability kind of held the crowd. And I think for many folks, I mean, when you do speaking to a large rally, there are basic themes, right? And stories and commitments, right? So it's not like you are in a seminar and explaining things, in depth, getting real granular, but speaking about the vision and the task of the revolutionaries, the task of the country in the direction of the revolution.
So during that time frame when you were in Cuba, which is in 1964, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were still alive at that time. Also, the Voting Rights Act and the voter suppression was happening in 1964. Can you speak a little bit about what was, I don't know, Mom, what do you want me to say with that question? I don't know. What would
Okay,
you
I'll
like?
take it. I'll take
I
it.
don't know what you want me to do.
Well, I'll respond to what you said.
Mhm.
We were, as you mentioned, we were in Cuba in 1964. And I mentioned before that Uhuru, our group, was at the cutting edge of radicalism, perhaps the most radical Black organization, or organization, period, in the country at that point. Now, there were others, some militant, or some very activists, but they were kind of still operating within the framework of the system. And those activists, those very courageous, committed activists in 1964 were involved in the SNCC sponsored summer project for voting rights. So there you have SNCC, you had some of the leaders of SNCC, and they were in Mississippi. They were in really, really terrorist territory, trying to register Black folks to vote. And they were building the Freedom Party, right? And this is where you had Fannie Lou Hamer, so that was that. So their thrust was, let's try to get the constitutional rights extended to Black folks, particularly in Mississippi. And the Constitution said that essentially sort of supposedly provided voting rights for Black folks. So they were dealing with the KKK and the white terrorists and trying to get included in the U.S. system through electoral politics. And we basically was repudiating everything that the U.S. stood for, because the democracy for us, it was a sham. And so we aligned ourselves with the revolutionaries and the radicals, rather than the militants and those who were basically pushing for integration and sort of acting and wanting the U.S. to fulfill its commitment for free and fair elections. So that kind of reflects the difference in our politics, that we're aligning ourselves with revolutionaries, and they are pushing for reformist goals within the U.S. system. So I think their work was very important work, but we were so alienated from the U.S. and what it stood for, and that's why we just really identified more closely with those forces that were fighting against capitalism, imperialism, and racism in a deeper way, and in a broader way. And we had a strong international orientation, more so than most of the SNCC people, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, all right?
So, what readings or what teachings were you invested in at that time? I know you've talked about it before. Could you talk a little bit? Because you're saying
Mhm.
you're really invested in
Yeah.
my assumption decriminalization and imperialism. So,
Mhm.
if you're, it sounds like you're feeling like you had maybe a more global perspective. So it was very tiered and very layered that you could think about the individual, the family, and then the various systems that the community is functioning within, and then also broader. So it sounds like you had the opinion that maybe that wasn't happening for a lot of other communities. Maybe they're just thinking about their homogeneous communities that they're kind of functioning in.
Mhm.
So could you tell me about what in particular, like I know that we're particularly talking about Cuba, but tell us again about what provided this like layered perspective, this international perspective, and how you've been able to practice that consistently in your work.
Mhm. Well, I think the most significant revolutionary, particularly in the 20th century, was Mao Zedong. I was deeply impressed by what the Chinese communists were doing. And I think I read almost every volume of, they had, they had a journal that, that was subscribed by the library at Wayne State University. And I would read all those issues. And I was greatly impressed by their philosophy, by their tactics, and how they approach programs. So even more so than the Cuban Revolution or Che Guevara, Mao Zedong, I think, in his writings, had a great influence. And I could see then that the Chinese were going to be basically a dominant force in the future. And I said, look, if you at that time they constituted about 1/4 of the population, and I say that a political organization that could organize 1/4 of the human beings on this planet has to be, they have something that I need to study, in their ability to do that. And of course, it's coming to fruition in the 21st century because China, in terms of its economy, might be almost number one in their technology, and how they have organized their society is something to people is got sort of fantastic what they have done. So I could sort of see that they have that kind of potential in their ability to how they operate, how they organize their how they organize their party, and how they and the strategy they had for uh, for China, and they named it the People's Republic of China. Okay, so and then we knew we had a deep understanding about why America was so powerful, because America was an imperialist power. It exploited the resources of all the other territories that they dominated. They made sure that their financial system was the centerpiece. They made that dollar operate like gold itself, and that put them in a in the seat of a commander. They had a command economy through their banking system, through the industrial system, and all. And China was getting ready to challenge U.S. And you can see that the U.S. really wants to destroy China, because it's they see the rise of China and the decline of America in relative power terms. Right? And, so again, we had a very strong international orientation. I mean, some of our members like uh, Charles Simmons, he's traveled over in Africa. He was over in the Middle East, uh, um, all around. And General Baker and Charles Johnson, all of us had a very, very strong. And I think among the you who are members, we probably had the strongest internationalist orientation. We probably had the strongest internationalist organization of all the organizations, including, like the white left organizations. So again, in terms of radicalism and in terms of progressive thinking, I think we were at the point of the spear in terms of that.
And what's led you to have those beliefs be consistent in your practice? So if you're saying that in the early 60s, these were your beliefs, and usually people, with different like historical events and different readings, that maybe your perspective would change from 1964 to like present 2022. How has your belief systems altered based upon historical events?
Oh, I think in the 1960s, one model for us was the Bolshevik Revolution, where the working class, factory workers and all, were organized, and that the conception was that the working people would form like a people's party, and they would be the principal transformative force, to change society. And so I subscribe to that Marxist-Leninist orientation, of the working class, a working party, and how that would change. And I also thought that the capitalist system was, I didn't think it was as strong as I know now that it was. Okay. And so my ideas and strategies changed? Yes, they have. Okay. I had back in 64, I envisioned that maybe the Soviet Union and China and all these socialist organizations will consolidate and be a more powerful force, and they would undercut the forces in the West, like Western Europe and the USA. So here we are, over 60 years later, and Western Europe and the US combined are still at the top of the hill. I didn't think. And I think that many of the ideas that I held in 64, yes, my ideas have changed because the world has changed, and how I thought things would unfold did not unfold the way I thought they would, according to my my analysis.
Are there other things that you thought would have occurred that you were surprised by, or
Well, I thought that Cuba would be in a much stronger position than it is today. I didn't think that the embargo would last, for over 60 years and try to crush the Cuban Revolution. So Cuba is still hanging on, but their whole development has been stifled. And I didn't foresee the collapse of the Soviet Union, with Russia and all the others, and what would happen in Eastern Europe. I did not foresee that. I thought they would get stronger. And then the rise of nationalism, in the former Soviet Union, where you have all these Eastern European countries pulling out, like Poland, like Hungary, like the Estonia, all of them breaking out of the Soviet bloc. And now you have this antagonism between Ukraine and the Russians. So that breakup of that kind of solidarity in that system, I thought was a very serious setback. And during the 60s, the Soviet Union was a strong supporter of Cuba, in terms of the economy, because the US tried to undermine the Cuban economy. And because the Soviet Union was strong, they provided a lot of support for the Cubans. But then when the Soviet Union sort of collapsed, much of the support for Cuba also collapsed, right? And they found ourselves in dire straits. And in 1964, I thought that, with the Black liberation struggle in Africa, that with independence, that those African nations would be much further along, but they're not, because the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and all these other financial systems and institutions still have a stranglehold on Africa and undermine its development. Okay, and so those forces we were struggling against turned out to be much stronger than we had anticipated, at least I thought at that time. So my thinking and my ideas have changed as a result of what has unfolded in the last several decades.
So as a professor now teaching in St. Cloud, Minnesota, how do you what do you share with your students about your experience in Cuba, your experience in activism, and what message are you trying to get across for your students that are traditional college students and also non-traditional students as well?
Well, most of my courses focuses on the African American experience. So I mentioned international affairs, and I sort of allude to some experiences abroad. But my main focus is my experience right here in the USA, struggling against capitalism and racism, right here in America. So what I do share is my own history, growing up in Inkster, Michigan, growing up in Detroit, and the experiences and the stories I tell them to illustrate the levels and degrees of a racism and how it's practiced. So in my courses, for instance, I give them a sense of my background and roots, and I relate my stories to the stories of Black folks in the larger experience. So in my experience, I was born in 1941 in Atoka, Tennessee, born in a shack with no running water, right? People use a well and no electricity. And in 41, that was the common conditions of Black folks, particularly in the South. South was the whole area of poverty. And then, and I try to relate that to in 1941, the Civil War ended in 1865. And I tell them I'm only 76 years away from enslavement, right? That's a lifetime, And so my great grandparents were slaves, and that's how close that. So I draw the connection because slavery, legal slavery existed for 246 years, from the origins of America in British colonialism to the U.S. when it declared itself a nation and really formalized itself as a nation in around 79, right? And not 79, 1788, 1790, then the first Congress, and they defined who was recognized as a citizen of the United States. And they wrote, right, the founders, I'll call them the gangsters, involved in crime. All those plantations were crime scenes, crimes against humanity, right? So you got these, like taking land and committing genocide. That's thuggery. That's murder. Okay, so that's how you're going to build the nation on the basis of bloodstained ground and enslaved, chained people, and then you're going to declare yourself hey, the founding of a democracy. So you can see how it was founded and who founded it. And I'd say George Washington, one of the biggest slave owners in American history. So you had these, so they built a nation on a crime scene. It's still involved in crime and thuggery. Okay. Well, so I try to inform the students about who were the so-called, but you dress these thugs up and call them founding fathers. They have these lofty ideas about liberty and equality and all of that. So I just tell the students, all you have to do is introduce race into those stories that they're taught you and see what happens. That story flips 180 degrees. You turn all of those feel-good stories about American history on its head. Okay. Once you, all you have to do is bring in race stuff, you know, and then so you leave that out, then you can get sanitized version of it, of history. So
How long
what
have you been teaching for?
I've been teaching uh, over 40 years, right?
And can you tell us, so like with all the points that you were just addressing about like the messaging that you want to get across, I didn't mean to interrupt you and you can go along with your statement, but could you also add a little bit of just your interactions with students? So if you've been teaching for 40 years
Over
and you're
40.
if you've been teaching for over 40 years and you've been providing this Black African American, the story of enslaved Black people within North America, what how have you seen students change, or what's their reaction to your teachings? Since, I mean, we've had a Black president, we've had Trump, Clinton, you know, you've seen all these different political powers. How has that, how have you seen that influence students' thought? And um, yeah, how are they interacting with the world since you've been able to teach so many people?
Mhm. Well, one general reaction, particularly the reaction of bright students who are kind of serious about education, when I tell them and we begin to, and I provide evidence for the claims that I make, you know, show them, you know, documentation, and then we look at the real world and how uh, and what it looks like and what forces shape it to look the way it does. The thoughtful ones get angry because then why are they angry? They're reacting that uh, they have been fed Kool-Aid, you know, propaganda. People don't like to be lied to, and they like to hear the truth.
Can you
Something
describe
that
a little bit about how they're like physically and emotionally like acting in the classroom when they feel like they've been manipulated, or how
Mhm.
are they like reacting?
Most of them are, well, first of all, I try to the decorum is very important when you in a classroom. You know, you have to be concerned about class management. So first I have to create a climate of respect and of serious learning, right? And so there are kind of rules, and some written rules, some unwritten rules. So first, you got to make your classroom conducive to learning, and that what's happening here is serious, is serious. Right? So you have to create that kind of sort of climate. And once you establish that, then they know their purpose. When they come in, they're not to be on, you know, looking at a smartphone, doing that. Well, a lot of them do that anyway, but anyway, okay. So you try to do that despite people's strong habits to, you know, people at the phone, you know. So uh, in terms of their physical reaction, well, you know, as I said before, some get angry and some you can, sometimes their anger is manifest in terms of, you know, uh, their facial expressions and the kind of questions that they ask. But in some after class will make a comment, come up to me and say, you know, I really didn't know this, or, you know, they show appreciation, you know, for that. Because first of all, uh, I don't try to make any assertions or claims that I can't back up. And I will also use my own firsthand experience. And I think that's very powerful. You know, I'm not just telling you things out the book, but I'm going to tell basic little human stories, my stories, and ground that, uh, ground those points on the basis of personal experience and observations, right? So that's why usually when you teach, they, well, who are you as the teacher? And then so you have to establish some kind of credibility. And that's why usually when you introduce a speaker, you try to, you want to establish that speaker's credibility. So you tell them about their educational background, their research, the books they've written, things like that. you're trying to establish credibility. And so that what they do say will carry some weight. Because the question is, well, if a person is saying something, well, how do you know that? Right. Okay. So you answer that question that way. And so I try to integrate my personal stories, concrete stories, with the broader points I'm trying to make as they read books and literature and try to make sense of what they're reading. And then tell stories and relate to things, even if they're non-racial, that we as human beings experience. And I remind them about who we are as human beings, that, we're both rational and emotional. And the emotional side of us should uh, should not be ignored. As a matter of fact, it should be embraced. That's basically how we define our humanity, because of those emotions, our moral compass, and how and what drives us. Well, anger is an emotion, and love is an emotion, and affection is an emotion, and that's what that emotion gets us in motion. Okay, so we got to understand that. So my approach to teaching over 40 years is basically try to establish a rapport and a connection, and linking with them, make a human link with them. So I talk to them. So, I'm talking to you, right? So it's not like I'm talking to a wall. I look at the students and I look at them and say, yeah, I'm talking to you right now. I'm talking to you over here. Yes, I'm talking to you. Okay. So, and then I think that prepares a way of engagement, so we're going to exchange ideas. I have some ideas in my head that I want to communicate or convey to your head, to your brain. And to make that work, you have to have an open channel, and you have to create that channel for information to flow. Right? And then you got that, and that has to be intentional, right? If you go up there and you just pass them, no, you got to be active and say, hey, I want this person to understand this idea and get that point across. And so it's got to be kind of a conscious, you really want that person to understand something.
Did you have what notices did you have, if any, when Trump was president, and then also the start of the pandemic? Since again, like the policies and laws, you're talking about the Black African American experience. So were there any experiences that you had during those and these times
Okay.
with
First,
students?
okay. Well, first, when Trump was elected, a lot of people, particularly progressives, were in shock. It was very upset. And I remember my classes after Trump was elected, a lot of students, like kind of progressive students and other ones that are just kind of mainstream, they said they broke off a lot of relationships were broken, because some said they didn't know that their friend was so right wing. When they found out that they were happy that Trump won, you're going to get canceled. So there's a lot of canceling of progressive students to these, mild students. They didn't know, anybody's for front is favor of Trump is not a friend of mine. Okay. So it was quite a stir, and it changed a lot of relationships. A lot of students said that's what happened to them. So the impact is it upset a lot of students that were progressive, and of course a lot of students were, right wing, and actually they were happy about it. Okay, so that split was occurred there, and of course when Trump was elected, I saw this as a heightening of fascism in this country. This right wing, like white nationalism, just got pumped up. Okay, further energize that movement to the right. And so that was really a point that I saw a significant sort of a political reaction. About the students who weren't really that political, right? but that was a wake up call for them.
And what about the start of COVID and the political unrest within this the state that you live in?
No, okay. Well, most students, in terms of the mass demonstrations behind George Floyd, well, I didn't, well, I had a student last week that was kind of critical of the reaction. Most of the students sort of were sympathetic or kind of supportive or kind of sort of understood. But there was another large number of students that were silent. And since they know that to, kind of play it down or buy into the propaganda, they felt that they probably would come under attack, so they were quiet, right? So the ones who were kind of supportive, and there was another opposition, but it was silent opposition. But like last week, I had a student, he was in the military, and he said that when George Floyd was murdered, he didn't use that term murdered, okay, right? Because he's right wing, right? He said that he heard reports because he was outside the country, and he heard all of the cover up and propaganda, and he believed it. With regard to the demonstrations, to him, he described those as rioting. He said, why are these people burning down these buildings? Why are they looting and all that? So rather than talk about, well, these people had and then if there's an injustice, does that justify our, like that kind of reaction, right? And then he also said that with regard to the murder of Amir Locke, he said that, and he felt that that the murder of Amir was justified. And so he's from there. I mean, he said in the SWAT team, he said when you when you do an operation like that, a no-knock thing, and you see a person with the gun, that's all you need to see to start shooting, right? Because you're already doing. So he tried to justify the murder of Amir Locke, and he tried to he didn't justify the suffocation of and murder of George Floyd. So that was almost well, he did say, well, what he heard was that George Floyd was drugged up. He had drugs in his system. In other words, talking about saying that, this is a bad guy or his life does not mean anything. He didn't say that out loud, but when you go up and saying, well, maybe he just died because he had drugs in the system, right? And that maybe it wasn't the fault of COVID, all that. Try to get him off the hook, and then focus on rioting and looting as though the demonstrations weren't justified, right? So he's in that kind of mindset. And some students have that mindset, but very few kind of, just come out and try to express try to that. So in those two incidents, you see that. And most of the students sort of couldn't understand nothing. They were, for it. But those who do express in this kind of silent, significant size, we kind of share with this student who come out of the military. Right? They tend to be quiet, right? So you know how silent racism operates. So racism under the radar, and that's the normal mode of how you do racism now. Keep it under the radar, and then you bring up stuff to undermine what you're doing. You don't do a frontal attack against the progressives. You do you submarine them. You just go undermine them and go sideways on them.
Do you feel like the student that spoke up in the class and the white students that were on the trip in Cuba, how do you think they correlate? Because you keep coming against different forms of white supremacy culture in the bodies of these individuals that you're meeting with, their involvement. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll give you an example. I think Charles Simmons gave this example. When we went to the rallies, I mean, they were very spirited rallies, passionate. And, so, yeah, Simmons came, and he had a white roommate, on the trip. And so Charles Simmons, I think you read it, said he was surprised that his white roommate just saw those rallies as nothing but propaganda and a turn off, So they're there, you think they're part of the group too, right? And then, some and maybe the most of the white students were, with the revolutionary vibe, but you always have these others. They just silent if you haven't asked him, and you think that they all there cheering for the revolution. So I think all 10 of the Black students were solidly behind it. And the white students, you had diverse opinions, some that were really strongly solid behind it, and a significant segment that were not, and some were against, they were highly critical of the revolution. And to them, they had basically this thing got this white arrogant attitudes, all that.
So, as you had mentioned earlier, when there were white students that were saying unconscious question, like asking kind of unconscious questions, and he ended up breaking out into a fight. So you're also, yeah, again, having students that have that kind of narrative, and I'm sure you're not bopping them on the head in the class. Also, if you are, you can let us know. But how are you navigating those spaces? Because at least when you were younger, there was a physical fight, and and you can let us know like what your involvement was within that. But then, are you still having physical fights, or how do you negotiate that conversation within the classroom?
Okay. Oh no, I don't get physical with students, and I have to keep reminding myself that they are students and I'm the instructor or the professor, right? That relationship, because they're not I don't treat them as political adversaries. Somebody that I'm in combat, and I get much more aggressive. And I said that, well, I'm in a learning environment, and I have to treat them as students. I want them to learn, and it's not my role to get into a debate with them. I'm there to get them to maybe consider another viewpoint, or I got to engage them in a different way. So it's not like I'm on a panel and then we having a debate, So I don't want to get in a debate mode here. And so if they have some questions, I said, well, for instance, they said that he heard reports that the drugs in George contributed to his death. And I said, well, in my response to him is that you have 3 police officers on trial now, and they brought these medical investigators, from Harvard and all the rest. And they, with these medical reports, and they did, sort of autopsy in these medical reports, and this is their conclusion. So these are the conclusions of the experts, these medical experts, and they go up, and this information is on trial. So if you want to know what the medical records was on the medical record, then you can, and they testified, and it's on YouTube, like on YouTube, things like that. And you go up there and you can look at the credentials and look at those hearings. Okay. So that's how I deal with them. And so I'm supposed to teacher. So I'm teaching them how to sort of get to the truth. And, because people will present different opinions and all that. So what I want them to do is become independent thinkers. I don't want to put ideas in their head. This is not like, I'm not there to indoctrinate them, because they were rejected straight away anyway. I would not be effective. So what I want them to do is they hold that an opinion that I know that opinion is not accurate. Then I'm going to interrogate them. I say, well, if that is your opinion, what is it based on? What are the sources, right? So I'm just getting them to be able to, if they have a position, their ability to defend that position are that claim. And then in the academy, if you want to be respected as a rational person, then you have to provide that kind of evidence to support a position and to argue your point. And so that's what so in contrast with the group in Cuba, I mean, these are some whites just coming all off the wall. It wasn't even worthy of a sophisticated response, right? I mean, because it's coming off the wall and it's a display of arrogance and all that. So it did not merit, a well thought out radical response. They just had to be thumped, all right? Because any kind of argument was probably wouldn't have any effect anyway.
Is there any last minute ideas or comments you'd like to share?
Oh, well, you're doing a great job at interviewing. Matter of fact, you should pursue that as a career because you are excellent, So I just want to commend how well you are conducting these interviews, and that might be something you really want to pursue professionally.
That'd be cool. I like interviewing you. I need to do I think it'd be easier if I did a little bit more prep. But I think we're also talking about a lot of different things. So
Is Comrade around?
yeah, I just heard.
Check it.
Um,
Thank you, both of you. Now I'm going to stop the recording on my side.
Okay.
And then Luke, can you stop the recording on your side?
But
And I'm going to save the transcript of